All right. So the goal of this Git workshop is really to focus on some techniques for common scenarios that you run into when you're coding, especially for the personal project. We're not going to focus as much on things like merge conflicts and branches as part two of the workshop, which will happen right before the group projects, and hopefully with your group project teams, we'll cover that. So we're going to do some solo work to sort of simulate some of these aspects. We're going to build a simple app using some Flask and maybe some React. We're not going to use a database. We're not going to use React Router. It's going to be really, really simple. Just to give you a little bit of an overview on the app, we're going to probably have students, maybe courses, professors, and TAs. And I'm going to be giving you all the code for this. And in fact, it's in this all the code you'll need is in this repository. So I do recommend pulling this up in another tab, and we'll be copying and pasting as we're going to want to like sort of create our own Git repo for this to sort of see what happens. So the main focus is going to be this sort of larger category of a committed code that I don't want, and how to use git restore and git reset safely to unstage or uncommit code. We're also going to learn about some stuff along the way related to that. And then if we have time, we'll dig even deeper into the internals of Git. I just want to point out we have a sort of linked here. We have a sort of series of it's a bit of a cheat sheet of how to do various things. So that can be a useful resource, and there's some other links that I'll have as well. But most of today, we will be doing this git reset. I committed code I don't want. And in fact, I will probably just leave this up for a good chunk of today, so that it's easy to code along with, which is the goal. And just to confirm, everyone can see my screen, and you have the split screen now that I finally set it up of VS Code and the curriculum, correct? Okay, awesome. So we're going to focus on these commands, which you all have probably seen. And if you haven't, you'll get introduced to them. Git restore, git reset, git log, and git diff. But I'll also kind of show some workflows around how to make sure that you're using these safely and sort of avoid the common gotchas, or as it's often called, like foot guns of using Git, and which of these are sort of safe versus potentially destructive operations. We are going to dig deeper into some Git concepts. We're going to talk a bit more about the head, like what a commit is, and commit hashes and refs, what's called the three trees, and force pushing. So the scenarios that we're going to look at to kind of go through this are, I wrote some code and I did git add, and I don't want that code. How do I get rid of it? I committed some code, but I haven't pushed it. I don't want that code. How do I get rid of it? And I committed some code and I pushed it, but I don't want it. How can I get rid of it safely? So sort of the whole purpose of this workshop is to do a little bit of coding along, and the focus is going to be on the Git commands. So what I would just ask is, if you do code along, please be sure just not to run any Git commands until I'm doing them, because at certain points we will be stopping and pausing to talk about stuff so we can sort of see the before and after of things. So before we dive too far into stuff, please go ahead and just make a new directory somewhere. You can name it Whiskey Git Workshop or whatever you want. Just make sure that it's not inside a Git directory, and it shouldn't be a Git directory yet. And in fact, I will just go ahead and delete that. So if I type git status I should see fatal, not a Git repository or any of the parent directories. And make sure that you've got it open in the sidebar here. And that it's in the right spot, which is what I was fiddling around with for a minute there before we kicked it off. Because once we do not initialize it as a Git directory, we're going to hook into like a couple different extensions that will kind of depend on making sure that VS Code knows this is our project root directory or whatever it calls it, like the workshop directory or something like that. The other thing that actually we should all do with VS Code now, as long as we're looking at it, is if you go over to extensions, which is hiding over here for me because I have way too many installed. And if you search for an extension called Git Graph, and it should be this one, and this font size is a bit too big, so let's make it a little smaller. The one that says Git Graph with 7,600,000 installs, that lets you view a Git graph of your repository. And if you want, perform Git actions, but we're going to mainly use it because it gives a really nice visualization. So you should just have to search for Git graph. It should be the search result. Go ahead and hit install. And at the moment, that should be all that you need to do. Let me go ahead and close this out, and then let's get going. So now that you've got a directory set up here, let's go ahead and just type git init and hit enter. And can everyone see my terminal font size okay? Okay, awesome. So I just have created a Git repository. A moment ago, if I typed git status, I got some command line error message saying, hey, the like fatal repository does not exist, something, something, something. Now it works. And the difference is before there was not a directory named .git. And that git init command creates that .git directory. And as we discussed way back in like week 1, that's actually what a Git repo is this .git directory. Everything that Git needs to hold on to is there, as well as in a couple global configuration settings that live in a .git config file or directory on your home directory in Linux. Let's actually navigate inside this .git directory and just see what's in here for a minute. We're not going to touch anything, and 99% of the time, you should never, ever touch anything inside here, but we are going to come back to this directory a bit later. So if you cd into .git and type ls, there are a couple of interesting things that we see now. And I'll go ahead and just make this bigger since this is where we're going to hang out for just a minute. There's something called head, config, description, hooks, info, objects, refs. And if I do ls head, or if I do cat head, so ls would print out it, like if it was a directory, it would print out what's inside it. Cat, I don't remember what cat stands for, but basically it prints the contents of a file to the terminal. Like I could do code head as well if I wanted. And we could see what's inside here. And this is actually really interesting. I see here in this head that it's just a text file. And over here, something called a ref. And there's refs / heads / main. And we're going to come back to head and talk about what it is in a minute. You all probably, this is dredging up maybe a couple memories of week 1, and head is sort of like the very top, the most recent commit of a branch. And we're about to see a bit more of what that is. But let's go ahead and then there's this interesting refs/heads/main. And if I look over here, there's actually a directory named refs. So let's do ls refs. And lo and behold, I see heads and tags. And if we have time, I'll talk about Git tags. They're kind of a useful feature and something that's nifty to see. But let's go ahead and do ls space refs/heads and see what's inside here. Nothing. Let's try cat refs heads. Oh, and it's a directory. So apparently there's nothing inside there, and I'll go double check right now just to make sure that I didn't like mistype anything. But no, there's absolutely nothing inside there at all, which is fine. I'm going to go back to my .git directory, and I'm going to go ahead and close out this file named head. And in fact, I think I'm going to cd up a level, so I'm not in the Git inside the .git directory now. I'm inside my root directory of my project of my Git repo. And I'm going to create a new branch. And the command we use is git checkout with -b for branch. And then we're going to name this branch, let's just name it initial -setup. And I see over here this command line statement, switch to a new branch, initial -setup. And let's go ahead and navigate back into the .git directory for a second. And let's look at head again. And if I look here, I see this ref is now different. And before it was the other branch main, my default branch. But now the branch is initial -setup. So a ref in like Git terminology is a way of referring to a particular commit, a reference. And head is a reference to the most recent commit for whatever branch we're on. And we see here that there's this whole directory refs/heads, and basically it just is kind of switching back and forth. And I don't even think there's anything inside refs heads yet. And there will be once we start making some commits, but it's interesting to see like just what this stuff is inside the .git directory. There's this directory objects that we'll look at more later. If we have time, we probably won't get into description or hooks. If we do ls config, or maybe cat config. So if I do code config, I see here is some configuration information about my Git repository. Something interesting to note is it's ignoring case sensitive for certain things. Most of the Git config like probably lives in the global Git config, but also since we haven't connected this repo to anything on GitHub, there's no remote URLs or anything like that yet. So let's go ahead and close that stuff out. And now let's go ahead and start writing some code and learning about this git reset command. So there's git reset and there's git restore. And git restore is the safer command to use. And let's write a little code and then we'll talk about sort of where it's living in Git, and we'll do a couple things with it. So make sure you're not in your Git directory. You should be back in that project root directory now. And I'll just copy and paste these commands into the Zoom chat. If you have a Python environment active like I do right now, please deactivate it. Because I do want us to actually be creating a Python virtual environment directory in here, because we are going to then add it by mistake and then unadd it. So I'm going to create my virtual environment directory for my Python project. and I'm gonna activate it. And I apologize, that command wasn't in the list of commands there. And I'm gonna go ahead and pip install Flask and Flask cores. And we're gonna do a pip freeze to and pipe the output of that command into a new file that we'll create named requirements.txt. So we're gonna have a front end and back end eventually. So let's go ahead and create some front end and back end directories and a README file. So I'm gonna run the command touch readme.md. And I'll go ahead and paste these in the Zoom chat as well. Because again, really the focus is on the Git commands. And we'll navigate into the backend in just a second. Let's actually pause here and look a little bit at our Git repository and see what's going on. So I'm going to go ahead and type clear. So I know there's a lot of different ways to interact with Git. There's the command line. There is the VS Code. It is hiding somewhere in here. I have so many extensions open. Source control tab, which is actually pretty useful. So you can't see it, but it's sort of the symbol of the Git branches and commits. And if I look in here, I see under this changes column, there's all the files that I added. Every single file, including the virtual environment directory. And we're not going to add a .git ignore because we're going to add this by mistake on purpose. And then there's this big button commit here that's waiting for me. There's some options here that we'll get into later. And if I go ahead and I open up Git graph, which I'm going to do just by, let's see, I believe if I do Command Shift P, Git graph, view Git graph, this is probably the easiest way to do it. So just hit Command Shift P on a Mac, or I think on a Windows, Control Shift P, and type Git graph, and this should be the first option. And so there's not a lot to see here at the moment because there are no commits yet. So we can just go ahead and dismiss that. But we at least have Git graph up now as a tab here. And so we will be seeing stuff here. But right now there's absolutely nothing to see because we haven't committed anything at all. But if I type Git status, I see my branch. I see no commits yet. We've got untracked files and all of this stuff. And this, I know you're all familiar with. And then we can add Git add to track. So let me talk a little bit about sort of what Git add does and the tracking. If we have time, we'll go more into the guts later, but I want to start at a slightly higher level. So there's this sort of saying in Git of the three trees. And let's see if I can't get my trees close enough so we can see them all together. How readable is the text on this TL draw, by the way? Are we good, or is it a bit small? So in fact, I'll just go ahead. I'm going to make a notes file. This I'm going to use for us for the class. So don't worry about anything I'm putting here in the notes file. So the three trees, basically, so our Git repository is everything that lives inside the directory that holds that .git directory. And all the code that we write and all of those files is tracked by Git in one of three ways. There's what's called the working tree. And this is actually our directory. This is like our file system and all this stuff in here. And so all of this code that's untracked, that's where it lives in Git. So untracked changes are here. Stuff we have not added and committed is here. It does not really protect this code. Like I can go ahead, and first of all, I can check out main and patspec main did not match any files known to Git. Maybe interesting. I wonder if it's because I haven't committed anything yet. Because we were totally just on the main branch just a moment ago. So for some reason, I'm running into an issue there. But as you've all seen before, like if you have code that you've been writing, you can actually check out other branches. I can go ahead and delete this. I can create a file and delete it. And Git doesn't really know or care. When we run that command git add, stuff gets moved from the working tree into what's called like the index or the staging area or the staging index. And this is the stuff that's on deck for our next commit. Whereas I like to think about it like the cookies are now like on the baking tray or the muffins are in the muffin tin and they're like about to go in the oven. And then there's what we're familiar with, which is the commit history, or we can just call it head, which is the most recent commit that we've made on this branch. And once something is committed in Git, it's safe and very hard to deliberately delete. When we do git add, Git has some protection around changes in the index. But if we do delete it entirely, it's lost. Right. Well, as we know, once our code is committed, we can delete code that's been committed, etc., and it's still saved in the commit in Git. We would have to delete the commit itself to get rid of that code from the commit it was in. So these are what's called the three trees, and our code and the changes that we're making in Git is always in one of these three states. And if I zoom in a bit on this diagram that I totally lifted from the internet, from actually a great site that we'll share. This is sort of the workflow. And for working tree, again, think all the stuff that I'm writing and typing here, or you can think of it as a sandbox if you prefer. Like I'm writing code, I'm making changes. I use git add, it gets saved to the index. And then I run the commit command, and a commit is created in this repository based off of whatever's in the index. And then like, as I'm writing code, maybe I need to check out a different branch or go back to a previous commit. So you've all seen if you commit code and then you switch branches and it's different, Git will actually change the stuff in your file directory. That is Git changing what it thinks of as the working tree. So those are sort of the three states that our Git code can live in. And now that we kind of like have these tools to think about, let's go ahead and actually start committing some of the code that we created. Oops, excuse me. Let's go ahead and write a little more code just so we have like an interesting Flask app. Like let's add this student stuff and let's add this README code. And I'll go ahead and do that now and pause for just a sec for anyone that wants to copy and paste. And in fact, that's what I'm going to do as well. So I'm just going to, I think in the backend directory, we'll make a file named app.py. And I'm going to copy all this code in. Again, just so we have something that feels real that we can maybe interact with a bit as we get further on. And there's not a ton going on in this Flask app. There's a student model. There's no database for simplicity. Some really simple, a student just has an ID and a name. And there's like two routes that I created. One that returns a ping, one to get all students. I don't even think we're going to end up getting to any front end code. And let's go ahead and make a README for a backend. So we'll make a README file as well in the backend directory. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this code in. Because again, the goal today really is working with Git. And now if I type Git status, I'll see all that stuff there as well. And now let's go ahead and run git add with a dot. And we're going to add everything. So as you may or may not know, you can add individual files. I'm not going to actually run this command, but if I wanted to add just the README file, I would do it like that. If I wanted to, for some reason, add all the markdown files in this directory, I would do it like that. And actually, sort of the best practice is to add specific files with git add so that you have more control and you don't accidentally add something that you don't mean to. On a practical level, though, especially when learning and getting used to it, git add dot, which will add everything, is really simple, and I do use it all the time. So let's go ahead and run this command now. So now if I type git status, now all of a sudden, Git is tracking all of this code. And because it's got the virtual environment directory in there, there is an awful lot. And in fact, I think what I'm going to go ahead and do is type ls real quick and grab this. And let's go to TL draw and sort of diagram out what we just did. And we'll put the .venv and give it a bunch of spaces. And let me go ahead and put maybe like an oval around this. And let's go ahead and make this, let's make it green. So this was all of the changes that we had in the working tree. And then when I read git add, Git moved them all here into the index or the staging area. And so now there are some protections that we get from Git. If it lets me check out main. So note that even though I can switch branches, and the issue here totally is, while I may have created these branches without any commits, there's not really anything for Git to switch to yet until something's committed, which we'll learn about in a bit. And then I could switch branches around if I say before I committed this code, I realized, hey, I want to commit this to a different branch. But the real issue here, as we all can see, is that I made a mistake and I added my whole virtual environment directory. So without intended to, I checked something in to the staging area, right? And now I want to get it out. And if we have something added, we can use the git restore command, git restore -- staged to unstage changes. And many of you have probably seen this. And if I could get to the top of this git message, because it's so incredibly long, because of all the .virtual environment directory files, you would see, in fact, Git giving us that message. And if I go here and I look in my version control, I now see under changes, there's nothing. Under staged, there's everything. And in fact, let's say, just to show an example of this, here is a change not staged, not added to the index. And if this wasn't so long and I could go ahead and I can see it, but now all of a sudden here under changes, I can click here and we can see that Git is indeed tracking and paying attention to the changes that happen. We can actually poke around inside the .git directory, and Git keeps track of everything with what's called like objects and blobs, and see where that is. But we'll come back to that later. So we're going to use this command restore staged to safely unstage our changes. So if I've added something, this is the command that I would run to unstage it. So this is a safe command. We are not going to lose any work. It's not going to delete anything. It's just going to move whatever we want it to from the index back to the working tree. So the risk here is if I do make a mistake and goof, like it's gone because nothing is committed yet. So if I've written a ton of code, but I haven't made any commits, I do want to be a little careful. If you're really, really nervous all the time, I will sometimes just copy and paste something if it's important into a file that's not in the Git directory. I'll literally like open up Notepad or TextEdit or something and paste it in there. But we have too much stuff in there to do that. But what we're not going to do is git restore staged dot, as that would unstage everything, right? And if I made a mistake and instead of git restore staged, I accidentally typed like reset -- hard. And since reset and restore are awfully similar to each other, that would really suck, because that would get rid of all this work. So I think a really, really good habit for any of these commands is be specific, be as specific as possible when you're telling Git what you want to restore or reset or anything. You do not want to be using the dot with these commands. So I am going to go ahead and type restore dash dash staged and then .benv. And we are going to run this command now. And interesting. I wonder if this is from me switching branches. And I wonder if I've screwed something up along the way by doing this. Could not resolve head. Let's see if there's a quick fix to this one. I think I may have outsmarted myself by like switching back and forth between the branches. So this is a good sign in terms of debugging, by the way. Like I'm searching for Git cannot resolve head, no commits. And the first Stack Overflow result actually has an error exactly like what I ran into, where I ran git restore staged and it returns this error. And this is actually great because I ran local git init, yada, da, da, da. This looks good. And it looks like I may be running the wrong command here. Actually, I may have gotten this backwards. And let's try running git reset and the path to file. And I think what I'm going to do just as a sanity check is I'm actually going to look up the git reset command. So frankly, the documentation here is hard to read. And there's a whole bunch of stuff here. So it helps to like have something else that tells me that this is probably what I want to be looking at. And then if I kind of read through this, I do see right here, this means that git reset with some path is the opposite of git add. And again, frankly, this documentation is arcane. And I think that is one of the major challenges with Git. A lot of the concepts are actually pretty straightforward, but the documentation is arcane and the way they talk about it. But we see here, okay, reset resets the index entries for all paths to their state. It does not affect the working tree or the current branch. And that sounds exactly like what I want. It does not affect the working tree. So this stuff, the .venv should hopefully be moved back out of the index and back into the working tree. And especially because this is just the Python virtual environment directory. If it does get deleted, it's not the end of the world. If I was doing this for real, and it was something that I cared more about, again, I might just copy and paste that into a text file. But let's try git reset.benv. So this is a good sign. Unstaged changes after reset. I see that there. If I use the version control VS Code tool, I see all this other stuff is still staged. I see all this massive junk in the .virtual environment directory there, unstaged. And if I type git status, I'm still going to get, well, actually, because this is an untracked directory now, this is actually much more readable. And so we can see everything that we have staged. We see what we don't have staged, and then we have this untracked file. So I do apologize, and I'll update the command. But in this case, if we've added something but not yet committed, we can just use the git reset command to move it out from the staging index back into the working tree. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and add the changes I made to the README because I do want those, I think, in this commit. And now if I type git status, I see, oh, excuse me, it was git add backend readme. And now if I type git status, and I type git status after literally everything I do with Git, I see the readmes over here. I'm going to go ahead and add a git ignore directory. Put my Python virtual environment directory in there. And now Git is paying attention to this .git ignore directory, and it will ignore the virtual environment directory, and we don't have to worry about that again. And so here we just kind of like walk through these steps. But let's go ahead and make our commit and see what happens. Let me hop over to TL draw. So what we've kind of done here is we've moved back in here this .env stuff. And we've gotten rid of it, and we went ahead and we added that .git ignore directory. And so I'm going to go ahead and type git status just to confirm, and I think everything looks good. And so I'm going to type git commit. And as many of you have seen, you can also do git commit -m to add a commit message. And I could say like initial commit. There might be some times where you want to write a fuller, longer commit message. And if I just type git commit, because in the day one install fest, I set up the default editor for Git to be VS Code. It will actually open up a VS Code window. And now I can type a longer Git commit message if I want. And the syntax for this is basically you want this to be descriptive and useful. So if someone sees this, they can see what's going on. Anything with a pound sign is commented out. If you want to, you could add this. It's really dealer's choice. And now if I save and quit this, then that has been committed. And if I type git status, I see that I actually made a mistake, and the git ignore is untracked. So the state of my application now is over here, benv, which shall never ever be committed, and git ignore. And let's delete the git ignore from over here. And let me zoom out a bit. And now all of this has been committed. And in fact, if I go over to, if I just open up Git graph, I see I finally have a commit, as is indicated right here. And we'll talk in a minute about sort of like what the heck is here in this commit, but I can see here's the branch. If I wanted to filter to that branch, I could, but since it's the only branch at the moment, there's not that much information. I could see the same information with the git log command, where you see the author, date, and the commit message. With git graph, there is also a way where I can see the information about the commit itself, which is part of what's captured in the commit, right? What we have here is what's called a hash, which is a hash is an algorithm where if you feed it like an input, it will produce a unique alphanumeric string as an output. every time. So this is a unique, guaranteed unique identifier for this commit. This is our very first commit, so it doesn't have a parent. There was no other commit before it. And then the commit captures a bunch of different changes, and we could actually go and look at each of these changes. And it's not that interesting right now because this is all new files that were created. There was nothing in the backend README. I guess I should have put something there. Or it looks like there was nothing in my front end README. And it looks like requirements.txt needs to be moved into my front end. But you can see all of the things in the commit, which you can do on GitHub as well. So I think there's one more thing I want to show, and then we'll pause and see if folks have any questions. So a really useful tool in the toolbox is, well, I've got this .git ignore, and I really meant to add it to that commit, but I totally forgot. So I can do git add, and I can do another commit. And in fact, let's run git add .git ignore. And now if I type git status, right, the git ignore is now in the index and has been moved out of the working directory. And virtual environment is still over here. And if I go over here to source control, I don't even see venv in here anymore because of the git ignore directory, but I see the git ignore staged. So at this point, instead of a commit, a really useful utility that we can use is git commit amend. And what this does is it will take whatever I have staged or added to the index and add it to the most recent commit to have. So if I go ahead and do git commit amend, notice that it opens up the same commit message that I had before. And in fact, I thought I'd added the git ignore, so I already mentioned it there. Here's that new file git ignore, so I might as well uncomment that message and go ahead and save and quit. And so now git ignore was actually added to that commit. I actually just modified a commit that already existed. So this is a really common workflow. I'll use git commit amend all the time. Like I'll make a little commit, I'll write a little more code, I'll add and run git commit amend, and I'll actually build up a bunch of like bullet points in the commit message describing each feature change so that my commit ends up being like one cohesive chunk that captures my application in a working state. But we do have to be a little careful because we actually are modifying code that's already been committed. So like you could, change stuff and then lose it once you run git commit amend if you like changed a function in a certain way or something. And if I look at this git graph, I only see the one commit and it's been updated, right? And in fact, now there's no uncommitted changes because we've got git ignore ignoring the virtual environment directory. And I've got my initial commit. And I suspect if I close and reopen git graph, we now, yeah, it just needed to refresh itself because it doesn't know that it changed. We now see that new file .git ignore added to that commit. So this, I know I've been going on for a bit, so this is a good pause point, I think, to check in and see what questions folks have or what's on people's minds. And let me get a quick show of hands to help me kind of like get a sense to like how many folks like have like used git reset and are pretty comfortable with it, and this is sort of like a review. Okay, so a good number of folks. And then how about with like the Git working trees? Like how many folks is that a review for, or is this newer information? Okay, so a mix. Awesome. Cool. No, I appreciate it, and thank you for bearing with me. Um, let's do this. Let's pause the video and take 10. And then when we come back, I'll move, I think, at a quicker pace through the other sort of git restore commands where we are going to use git reset soft to unstage changes, and we'll probably make like a backup branch. And I think the more interesting one of and that will take us a bit deeper into seeing what's going on with Git and head and refs. And then once we wrap that, we are gonna see using Git reset soft probably and a force push. And so we'll hook this up to a repo and we'll see how to. So we've used Git commit amend to modify committing code, but we'll see some other ways to do it. Awesome. Let me go ahead and pause. All right. So we went through how to move staged code back into the working tree, or how to undo work I've added but not committed if I want to unstage and what we saw is what the command we want to run is git reset them and git reset just by itself will move a change out of the index or staging area back into the working tree. And what we're going to check out next is how to move code I've committed but not pushed. How to uncommit code I've committed but not pushed. And again, we're going to use git reset to do this. So let's add a bit more code to our app. We saw with git graph, we have some of these changes here, and we'll explore those a bit more in a minute. But let's go ahead and let's check out a new branch here so we get just a little flavor and variety. So if you type git status, you should have on branch initial setup. You won't have a notes MD file unless you've been typing it out long, so don't worry about that one. There shouldn't probably be anything here, and git log, and we should just have that one initial commit. So go ahead and type git checkout space -b to create a new branch. And let's name this branch backend-use.env. And we're going to set up the python.env library with Flask. And so I'm going to add some Flask code here. I'm going to go ahead and paste in some code as well. Again, this is coming from the README, and again, the Python code is not so much the point. So go ahead and run these commands to install the python.env library. And update requirements txt. And the cat command just shows that just prints out the new requirements.txt. And let's go ahead and also let's modify app py a little bit. So there's just a bit more code in here for us to look at. And I'll paste this in as well. We're going to create our .env file in just a sec. And in fact, I think I'm just going to paste this into my app py. And I'm going to go ahead and select the Python interpreter for my virtual environment directory, which, there we go. We'll make the swigglies go away. So I don't even think we're not using any of these yet. In fact, there is no API. So this is all just sort of an example. Let's go ahead and create that .env directory though. And this should be in the backend directory. So actually what's probably the easiest is just run the command touch space backend slash .env. And then code backend .env. And just go ahead and paste in these made up environment variables from the Flask environment one we'll use in just a moment. And we can save and quit. And now if I go ahead and type git status, I've got all these changes not staged for commit, and I've got an untracked file. And these are all changes to existing files. And it is a good reminder and good to note with Git, like if we go over here to the source control tab and we look at these changes, if I click on each of these changes, remember when a commit is not the entirety of a file, it is a whole bunch of changes across a bunch of files. And we can see here's the change made to the python.env. The .env directory is brand new. Excuse me, this was requirements.txt. And here we have a bunch of changes to app.py. And in a minute or two, we'll see some other ways to look at the history of these changes as well with git diff. And in fact, if I type git diff for backend slash app.py. So this command diff that I just ran, and I'll type it out again and paste it out for folks. This is actually quite useful. We're going to see how we can use it to compare commits against each other. But diff again is short for difference. And it will show me the difference in the most recent commit on my branch, the head of my branch, versus whatever I have. I forget if it's staged or just in the working directory. So if I ever want to kind of like double check what the changes are, the git diff tool is really useful. And you can do it for the whole repo, or as you saw there, for an individual file. So we haven't added these debug changes yet, and we're not going to on this commit. So if you type git status, you should have app.py and requirements.txt as your changes, and don't worry about the notes. And you should have the .env file. And if we go back over here, does someone maybe just want to kind of like, well, actually, I'll just add them here because we've already added them. But we have changes to app.py, right? And then we have the .env file that has been changed as well. And we have changes to requirements.txt. And these are, in fact, excuse me, in the working tree because I have not yet added them. So let's go ahead and add these. And I'm gonna add them one at a time just for fun. So let's add app.py. Let's add requirements.txt. And let's add backend /.env. Even though we know we shouldn't, the point of this is to make the mistake and learn how to undo it. And now with Git status, I see that they have been staged. Again, you won't have notes, MD. And let's go ahead and commit these changes. And I'm just going to describe this as added python.env library. So we can get env vars for Flask from a .env file. I'm going to go ahead and save that commit. And if I look over here in Git graph, by the way, if I can make this go away, we don't really have a lot of branching going on. Like that's visually interesting to see. But if I only look at the new branch that I created, backend-use.env, I see that I've got these uncommitted changes. Oh, those are notes.env. And then this should be the changes that I just made. And interestingly, if I look at this information about this new commit that I just made, Git graph shows us the hash, the unique identifier for the commit itself. And let's make this a little bigger so we can look at this. And the parent hash. And so this is how branches actually work in Git. Just each commit contains the hash pointing to its parent commit. And it's kind of like a linked list, like working backwards. It's like from the head of the snake on back. And if I click on this, this takes me to this initial setup commit. And so Git is not actually really thinking of this initial setup commit as like being on a totally separate branch. Git really only cares about commits and parent commits. And in fact, if we poke around in the .git directory, we'll see something interesting now. So we're going to take a short detour, and then we're going to add a little more code and see how to revert our change. But if I navigate into .git, and please do go ahead and do this. So first of all, if we cat head, as we've seen with a ref being sort of think of it as like the same way you could have like one variable pointing to another variable, a reference to a commit. We know that whenever I check out a new branch, head changes to the most recent commit on that branch. And I see that this ref points to here, refs heads backend use.env. And when we looked at that refs directory before, there wasn't much in there. And in fact, let's navigate into refs and navigate into heads. And now if I look inside here, I actually see there's these two files, one for each of my branches. And if I do cat initial setup, I see a commit hash. And lo and behold, is indeed the hash for that commit. So this is how Git stores these references. This is how Git keeps track of the most recent commit for each branch. And if I cat the backend one, I would have thought it. Oh, it is a different commit. I just got confused because they both had E at the beginning. I apologize. These are indeed two different commits. So this is kind of cool. So we can now dig a bit more under the hood with Git. And we see that all that Git does with the branch is every time I make a new commit, it updates its refs and it updates the head for each branch to point to that commit hash, and it just stores this all in text files. And if we dug deeper into refs and objects, we would be able to find like the actual file where it's encoded in binary, but all of the changes for each of those exist. So I thought that was just kind of like a cool detour to take. And I do just want to pause there to see if folks have any questions around this, because I think this is kind of interesting and useful to see. Cool. So again, as we dig into Git, we see that it's not magic. It's actually a bunch of text files and like names that line up with branch names and hashtags for commits. And I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to navigate out of my .git directory until I back in my project directory. And let's go ahead and so we kind of moved all those changes up there. Right, when we made that commit, we've got that .env directory that we don't want. Let's add one more commit just to make it interesting. So let's go ahead and actually add this stuff. And let me make sure that indeed .env should be tracked now. So I'm not sure why it was saying that in. Yep, I think that was just like an old VS Code needed to kind of update itself. I always use like the Git on the command line as my source of truth for the current state of Git if I need to. So let's go ahead and add these changes to our Flask app. So we have one more commit on top of the one that we want to change. So if I go all the way down to the bottom, and let me go ahead and paste these in the Google chat as well. We're going to grab from that env variable using the .env library, this Flask env environment variable, and set is debug enabled to whatever we want it to be based on whether we're doing local development or if this is in a production environment. And so again, if I type git status, I see that, I now have those app py changes here in my working tree. And let's go ahead and add it. Right, and it's now moved into the index. And let's go ahead and commit it. And in the interest of time, I think I'll just do the -m and say using env file for Flask is debug enabled. And now if I go to my Git graph, and get rid of, I see here, I have these 3 commits now on this backend branch. And just for fun, if on the command line I do cat.git / what is it, ref heads backend, I see that indeed Git has updated the head for this branch to point to that new commit, because this commit hash has changed. And so when I create a new commit, Git, it's called an object. Git creates an object for it. In fact, it creates a little called a tree. But most importantly, a commit has this unique identifying hash, and Git updates its refs for the branch. And each commit points back to its parent commit. And then that's how the branch gets formed. So this is great, except I have a problem. We already committed this .env file, and that's exactly the thing that I don't want to do. And even worse, it's not on the most recent commit, it's one commit back. So the question is, how do I go a commit back and uncommit stuff or change stuff? There's a couple different techniques for doing this. The one I'm going to show you now is, and let's pull up the extensions tab, probably the right one to start with because it is more straightforward and I think a bit safer. And the command is git reset dash dash soft. So what git reset soft does is it will move code out of committed into, and let me go ahead and delete that. It will move code out of being committed into the staging area. And in fact, I kind of pulled up a little, let's do a sanity check here. But there is actually one really good link that I like, which is this one, which I'll share with folks and link to later. And just to talk about this git reset command, there are a couple different ways to use it. There's the plain old git reset that we saw. There's something called mixed, which is frankly a little more complicated and which I'll avoid. And the one that we'll see a bit later, that is the more dangerous one, is git reset dash dash hard. So git reset soft is great because what it does is it moves head back to the specified commit. It undoes all the changes made from where head was pointing and the specified commit and saves all the changes in the index, which means it adds them as staged and ready to be committed again. So let's quickly do a little diagram to kind of like walk through what we're about to do. And then we're going to do it. So ignoring the uncommitted changes here because that's just my notes file. We have these three commits that we've created. Right, we have our initial commit. We have where we added the python.env library. And this is our problem one. And let me make this nice and red. And then we have, what did we call this? use.env file for something, something, something. For is debug mode. And this should absolutely be green. Right, so this is the most recent commit, but this one back here is the one that I want to deal with that has the problem. And this one over here is the head of the branch. And then these two move back. Over here, the Git graph, it does show it in order, with this one, the head being at the top. So Git reset soft. So here's a question for you guys. If I run Git reset soft head, will that accomplish what I want and uncommit the commit that has the problem? Not a trick question. No. Yeah, I see a couple of heads shaking. It will not, right? We have to go back. So there's two ways to do this. And from doing my Googling of the git reset soft command, it's at least this site that I like. It says, hey, what it'll do is it moves head backwards and undoes all the changes from where head was back to the specified commit. So that tells me, hey, if I run git reset for this one, it should maybe undo this one and this one. And if I move it back here, I think it's for all three. So we probably want to run git reset on this commit right here and see if that's it. And if not, we'll go back one further. In fact, we might have to go back one further because it does say moves head back to the specified commit and undoes all changes in between. So we could move back here and then it'll probably want us to move back one further. And let me go ahead. I'm going to go ahead. Actually, I'll worry about my notes stuff later. So actually, this is a little bit of a tangent, but a great little feature that Git has sort of hidden away is something called stash. And it's basically like git stash will take whatever's in your working directory and stick it somewhere else. In like a little temporary storage that Git has exactly for situations like the one we're in right now, or that I'm in right now. Because unlike you all, I have notes MD, and I'm actually not sure, like when I run git reset, what happens with stuff in the working directory. So I actually don't even want to think about that. So I'm going to run this git stash command, and I'll make a little red polygon thing over here, and we'll call it git stash. And so if I run, so first of all, git status shows me notes MD is there. If I do git stash notes MD, I believe actually it's got just git stash by itself. And now if I run git status, there we go. So git stash takes everything in the working directory and sticks it in this little stash that's actually a stack data structure. And if I run git stash pop, I get it back. And this is actually really useful if you want to maybe like switch branches and you have like code in the working directory and Git isn't letting you move it around or something. So I actually use this all the time. So I'm going to use it right now and run the git stash again, because now this is nice and clean and there's nothing here. There is this little stash message, interestingly, that pops up. So I basically have two options in terms of how I refer to the commit I want to reset back to. I can refer to the commit hash. I can use the first six. Well, that's actually more than six, but the first several digits of the hash. I can use the whole hash if I want to. So I could like copy and paste all of this, or really we think it's not this, but in fact, the very first initial commit is where we need to move back to, is popping back over here. What we need to do is shift back in time to when we were here, when this was our head. This is what we're going to do. And then all of this stuff becomes staged. right? All of this stuff is going to go back here into the staging index is how we're going to solve this. So because it's a huge pain to find, well, it's not a huge pain, but a small pain to find these very, very long git commit hashes, and this is such a common thing, there is a really useful shorthand that we can use with refs. I can do git reset soft head, and let me move over here and make this a bit bigger so I can visually kind of indicate this as we do it. Git reset soft head -1 -1 or head -2. This is saying git do a soft reset 2 commits back from the head. So let's see, was that 1 commit too far back? In fact, I believe it was. I probably could have done head -2. Let's see what I have here. If I type git status, if I do git log, okay, so good news. The initial commit is still there. I actually did get this right. It looks like maybe this is probably, again, git graph getting a little overwhelmed with all the changes. There we go. So I can sort of, we see these other commits here. It's uncommitted changes. I think git graph, to be honest, can't quite like handle that we're in the middle of a reset right now. But git status is the most useful thing because it tells me what's going on. I see that all these changes are there to be committed. And if I do git log, I see that the only commit here is that initial commit. And that tells me that these other 2 changes indeed got soft resets. And git graph, I think, is just struggling to show that a bit, though it does show the uncommitted changes, which is interesting. So quick question. What's the advantage of resetting back to the staging area, to the index, as opposed to like resetting or doing like, I think it's maybe like reset hard that would move this stuff all the way back to the working tree altogether? Like, what's the advantage of kind of putting this stuff back here instead of back there? Any thoughts? Yeah, go ahead, man. Tom. You might be muted. Or am I not getting audio?
No, I think he's muted.
Okay. Tom, you are muted at the moment, sir. Unfortunately. No, no worries. So Tom, I'm gonna take a guess at where you're going, and I guess I'll sort of end up answering my own question here. So the short answer is the advantage is control. Moving these changes in here means like I can't go into a text file and screw something up as easily, or if I do, that change, and let's show this just for fun. Let's go into app.py and let's do a git diff on backend. Actually, I'll use the source control here. We see here the changes that we added. let's say for fun, I go all the way up here, and right here, I do something silly like this. Well, that silly mistake on my part is not staged for commit, which is a huge advantage, right? Because the enemy is always programmer error. Like we're human, we make mistakes. So the fact that Git in this case is not going to let me screw up this work that's already been done without like explicitly running git add is a huge plus. And so, and let me just go ahead and do like, and can someone actually, let's actually use the internet here to help me. Git remove from working tree. Remove change from working tree. How do I discard unstaged changes? And this is in fact the git restore command. So I did something a little silly. Git restore backend at py. Note that my other staged changes, let's see, nope, they are still here, which is great. I got a little worried for a sec. Just to sort of repeat and show that again, because this is actually really good to see. I open up app py. I do something silly that I realize I don't want to be adding and committed. Git restore will remove it from the working tree without touching the index with everything that I've added, the staging area. And can someone remind me, how do I get this .env file out of the staging area and back into the working tree? What's the command that we used earlier before the break to do exactly that? Brian, yes, sir.
Is it reset?
It is. Yes, it is. They are all hard to keep track of. And I will update the curriculum. Just to reiterate, restore is for changing stuff in the working tree. Reset is everything else for changing stuff that we have staged or committed. So we can use plain old reset to do git reset backend.env. And let's see, what did it not like? It did not like that I just forgot the slash in my path. And so that's another advantage of keeping all this stuff in the staging area, is I can then just use reset again, pick the one thing I want back, but keep everything else. And in fact, let's go ahead and open up the git ignored. Actually, we'll have to create a backend git ignore directory. And now we'll open it up. And in it, we'll put the .env directory. And now I can go ahead and git add backend git ignore. And so now I've got .env being ignored. I didn't have to open up a file and touch anything, which means there's zero chance of me making a typo. And I've gone 2 commits back and reset and unstaged some committed code. Now, the trade-off here is like once we do commit this, the commit history is going to change. We had 2 commits before. This is going to become 1. There are ways to do it without using reset, using what's called rebase, that would have let us go back in time to modify this specific commit. Rebase gets a little bit more complex and is potentially a little more dangerous. So I thought this was a good one to show. Also, at least 50% of the time, the commit you want to change is probably the commit you just made. Finally, for your personal project, when it's just you, the commit history does not matter as much, right? Really screwing up the commit history on a branch matters when you're working collaboratively with other people, where then someone else has to pull that branch history down, and now there's a conflict and they have to figure that out, which is what we're going to look at more at the other the Git workshop part 2 when we get to group projects. But let's go ahead and take this home. Let's run git status, and we've got these changes to be committed. And let's go ahead and do git commit. And now we can say use .env and env file for Flask settings. Use env file to put Flask in debug mode. And I'm not sure why VS Code wants to autocomplete there. And add, we'll just do this here. And in fact, I'll just add all these new files because it's nice to see that requirements.txt has changed. Add the .env dependency, add git ignore to ignore the .env file. I'm going to go ahead and save that and quit. And now if I type git status, and if I type git log, I see the log, and the environment variable should not be in there. And if I close git graph and reopen it, so it will refresh itself, then what we see is I'll go ahead and run git stash pop just to get rid of that from lurking around. What I see is I now only have 2 commits. My initial commit that we made way back at the beginning, and now the one that we made just now that actually combines those other 2 commits. If I go ahead and can click on that. And if we look over here at the changes, we see indeed that there is no .env file. So it is, we can also confirm that it's not checked into version control. And you can also do that over here. In sources, by the way, like there's all these options, like to click on, there's this thing git lens, though I think this is a different extension I've installed, to be honest, when experimenting around with this stuff. But over here in VS Code with commits, like here's the other way to look at commits, to look at a commit history with the built-in VS Code extension. Though I think Git Graph is particularly useful, and really GitHub is the best of all. Though we have not actually connected this to a repo on GitHub, so we can do that in just a moment, I think, just to see what that looks like. But yeah, we're almost at time, because I know the team stand downs are coming up soon. But that was really the main thing that I wanted to show folks. I think we have just a couple minutes left, so I can maybe hook this up to GitHub and we can show doing like a hard reset. But I want to check in and see what questions, if any, kind of folks have around this, now that we've kind of seen how to go into a commit and unstage it and modify it to fix any issues. And our problem is gone, and we no longer have 3 commits, but we have 2, and the head is back up here. Yes, sir.
Sorry, I was wondering if you could just quickly summarize the difference between git restore and git restore dash dash staged. Is git restore targeting your working tree and basically taking all that working tree editing and basically getting rid of that and setting it back to the last commit. Whereas restore dash dash staged does something similar to the index tree. Is that right?
Yeah, I am not gonna lie. I get restore and restage confused all the time, or excuse me, restore and reset. I get all of the Git commands for this confused all the time, except for git reset dash dash hard, like origin slash main, because that's the command I know that blows away my branch and grabs whatever's on Git hub and brings that back, which is the dangerous command to run unless you're sure that what you have on GitHub is what you want. Pretty much every single time I run like git restore or git reset, I Google the command and read up on it again to make sure that I'm running the right command. And I actually just recommend that you all do that or like write it down in a note card. I think, yeah, and I was seeing this. So Git is trying to make its commands better. Like Git checkout is notoriously overloaded, and there's like a Git switch command that's newer that we should probably start teaching, but I'm not sure if it's been like universally adopted yet. Git restore is one of these newer experimental commands. And indeed, like sort of the Stack Overflow post is describing here, I'm pretty sure it's about like resetting files from the working directory that we haven't added or staged. This actually looks pretty good, and it looks like it's coming. They're pulling it right from the Git book. So I'll just share this with you all in the chat. And I highly recommend write this down. Writing it down is probably the better move. To be honest, I should probably write this stuff down, but I just re-Google it every time to get like my confidence index from like, 50% to like 95%. And also because I've done it enough times where I just need the reminder. But yeah, Git restore is about the working tree. Git revert, I'll actually show in just a minute because that's actually cool to see. Git reset is about changing the branch. So reset is about committed or staged code. Restore is about code in the working tree that hasn't been staged or committed yet. Yeah, great question, Brian. And let me actually demonstrate Git revert real quick, because that's actually a fun one to see. So let me just go ahead and make a file. And commit it. And I see over here, it's the most recent commit. Let's say I know for sure I actually made a mistake. I don't want any of that code, right? And let's say, in fact, I add a print statement here that I don't want either. And in fact, let's do git add app py or backend app py. And let's use git commit amend. So what I just did is, and if we use git diff to look to compare the current commit versus the previous commit, we can see that I added something to app py, notes.md we don't have to worry about. And somewhere in here is this new file foo that I created that should be showing up there. And if I go to git graph, we should see both of those changes in this commit. And DJ, thank you for pointing out there is indeed a refresh button here, which is actually super useful. So indeed, I see this most recent commit, create foo. I added something to app py that I don't want, and there's foo.py. So git revert is awesome. And actually the description here in Stack Overflow is pretty spot on. We are going to make a commit that undoes the other commit. And for this one, I do recommend, like, you can do git revert head or head tilde one. So the good news here is nothing is lost because it's still in the commits. I generally look up the commit hash and grab it and just double check before running git revert just for fun. And note that the git commit message kind of already describes what's going on. We're reverting something. Here's the commit hash that we're reverting. This code was just wrong. And we don't need any of it. And so now, if I go to app py, my print statement is gone. If we go to git graph, I see that the most recent commit here is my reversion commit. And it deleted that file and it removed just that one change. So actually, if you ever have like one specific commit that you know you just want to get rid of, git revert is great. And if I ever decide that I actually don't want that, I can actually revert the revert. Which I think should then bring the foo bar back, and indeed brings back the file foo if I look in the backend directory. Or excuse me, foo was right here in the front end. And there it is hiding right there. So that's the nice thing about git revert is you don't lose your history. And this idea of a commit of like an immutable snapshot of the state of all the code in your repo is really valuable. And it's like a very safe way to undo stuff. But again, it's only useful if you know that it's like just the stuff in that specific commit that you want to get rid of. So I think we're at time. So this is probably a good time to wrap so that there's a bit of a time for break and team stand downs and then our code demo at the end of the day. Before we wrap, I just want to see if folks have any questions and if there are maybe like requests for other Git things that people would like to see. Not today, but in like a follow-up or something. And also, I just want to check in and see if this was maybe like some useful review and some useful workflows, or if this was stuff that you all were a bit more familiar with. Cool. Awesome. Thank you for the feedback. Yeah, Git rebase is awesome. I am a huge fan of Git rebase. I won't go into too much depth. I will go ahead and show it right now, since using it in like one particular way is pretty straightforward. So Git rebasing, without going into it too much, what it does is it changes a commit history and it changes commits. And if like merging is sort of, the two paths combining, Git rebase is sort of like, let's go back in time and add all those other commits there. Let's rebase all these commits on top of these other ones. So there's not enough time now to like, I think, do a proper explanation of rebase. But what there is time for is just to quickly demonstrate, I would say, the most common way of using it, which is I now have like these three commits here: create foo, revert create foo, and like unrevert, like revert the revert. And I don't want them. And instead, imagine maybe it takes you like, you've been following kind of the advice I've been giving of I'm making lots of little commits, but they're all sort of work in progress with commits and they're messy. and I finally finished all the backend logic for like one of my models and maybe like a serializer. And now it all works, but I have like 7 commits that this is spread across. Wouldn't it be nice if I could bundle that all up in one nice clean commit so that like if I ever had to go back in time, that one commit would capture my whole program in a good state. And to have shorter commit messages. And so that's what Git rebasing in this what's called interactive mode is for. And what it lets us do is what's called squash commits. We're gonna combine them. And the way you do it is I think about like, all right, I want to squash these 3 commits right here. And I'm gonna go just a bit further back in case I goofed. So I want to go like 4 commits back from the head. So I'm going to do git rebase dash I head minus tilde 4. Head back 4 commits from the head, from the most recent commit on this branch. You have unstaged changes, please commit or stash them. So this is Git, in fact, protecting me from losing notes MD, and I'm in fact going to run that git stash command. And now let's run git rebase again. So, okay. I don't know where this interactive rebase tool came from. It's actually kind of cool. I'm not going to lie. That said, I am much more used to the text version. And since I'm not 100%, if this is from like VS Code or an extension, I'm going to show you all the text versions so you all can see it. And it looks like it's from this extension Git Lens, which you can install if you're interested in. But this is what I'm much more used to seeing. And this does get a little funky because we're kind of like doing multiple steps here. We're like going to go back in time with Git, like, and we're going to then be able to modify stuff and recommit it. And they sort of give us these commands here, and it's a little weird. There's pick, reword, edit, squash, fix up. So I'm not going to get too deep into it. And I honestly don't recommend doing this without making a backup branch unless you feel very confident, because rebasing can potentially delete stuff. Once you get used to it, it is a nice workflow. Pick means we're keeping the commit. Reword means I'm just going to change the commit message. Squash means, as it says here, combine this with the previous commit. Fix up, I don't quite understand. I never honestly use any of these other ones. Drop would mean remove the commit entirely. It does all this stuff, but like 90% of the time, what you do is I want to combine this commit to squash it back into this one. And I want to squash this commit back into this one. I want to combine these 3 into one. This one before it, I don't want to touch at all. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And let's see, could not apply changes. I think this is just the Git rebase editor being weird with me. Changes to be committed. You are currently rebasing branch, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to switch back to text. And it looks like I want to say these tools may have yeah. And in fact, speaking of the most important thing with Git about being careful is I'm going to go ahead and I think just abort this rebase because I think this rebase editor is messing with me. I do think the squashing has worked. If I look at these commands here, like last command done, this and that, but I'm not confident enough about this. So I'm going to run git rebase -- abort. And if I do git status now, we're back to where we were. So I apologize, guys. I thought we could get there. We almost did. And then I think these extensions just kind of made my world a little wonky. But you at least got to see the sort of the basic idea there. And I know we ran a bit longer, but hopefully that was useful to see. And the moral of the story is don't install too many Git extensions. Remind me, and just tomorrow at the afternoon at some point, I'll show rebasing in full. But at least you got like a little bit of the idea. And probably the most important command there is honestly git rebase abort, because that is like your escape hash command. And you kind of got a little preview of like the concept. So let me go ahead and stop the recording, and then we'll break and dive into team stand downs.